Alright guys, welcome to the Language B SL oral exam video. So I'm going to be going through the marking criteria, exactly all the things you need to know. And hey guys, sorry for interrupting, just one real quick second, is that I realized how long this video is. It was way longer than what I anticipated, but really half the things I realized off the cuff that I didn't write down in my plan, so I just went on and on and on and on, which is why you realize it's a little bit all over the place. So sorry about that, but after all, I did put every single thing in there that I wanted to tell, and it's really got everything that I used and wanted to know and wanted to share in order to get both 2 high 7s in both of my oral exams for Language B. So really stick in there, make sure you get a notepad out because there is a lot of really good information. But most of it is really just based in the textbook, in the guide, in the Language B guide, so make sure you get access to that. But other than that, sit back, relax, take notes, and watch the video because it will be so invaluable. And stick to the end because I completely forgot, but in the end I included the number one most important tactic I used to practice before my exam. So thanks guys for watching and keep at it. I did do pretty well in both of my languages. I did Spanish BHL and I got a 27 out of 30 for that one. And I also did Chinese BSL and got a 28. Yeah, 28 out of 30 for that one too. So I know pretty well what I'm doing. So I'm giving some tips on what you can do to maximize your score because it really doesn't matter how well you speak the language. You could be a native speaker and still get a 5 or a 6, okay? So it really depends on what you do. That really makes the IB marker happy with what you're doing. So before we go anyway, let's go straight into the structure of it first of all. So it is key to know that there are 4 different sections within this oral exam. The first is preparation, and then second one is a photo. So you talk about the photo, and then the next section is where the teacher asks you questions about the photo, and then the last section is where the teacher just asks you random questions about a different theme. So I've got a quick notepad over here, so I'm going to do a quick diagram of what that looks like for you. So first you have a 15 minutes preparation. So within those 15 minutes, for the May exams, they haven't said anything about the November exams yet. But for May 2021 exams, instead of only getting 2 photos, each one from a different theme, you're actually getting 1 photo from every single one of the themes, which is super useful and very, very beneficial. So you can really prepare very well for 1 or 2 themes. But I'll talk about this later anyway. But yeah, so you get a choice from all these 5 photos and then you have 15 minutes to prepare. So within those 15 minutes, you can, technically in the IBIA guide or for the oral exam, it says that you can make brief working notes up to 10 dot points. And now a lot of schools aren't too strict on the exactly that has to be exactly less than 10 bullet points. However, one thing that is very important and is clear, and the IB says it in the syllabus, is that it says that your notes are not to be read aloud. You are not making a script. These are just working notes for you to work off of during your presentation because you're speaking for 3 or 4 minutes. You could easily write a script, or easily, you could definitely write a script within those 15 minutes and then just read it aloud. But this isn't a writing exam. This is all about your oral and about your pronunciation, intonation, how well you use the language. So make sure guys, do not write a script, please. What I like to do is I'll attach some photos as well, is that I like to draw mind maps. So this is personally how I did it. And for me, anyway, I found it a lot easier to write in my target language. So what I mean by that is that in my mind map, let's actually go over the structure right now so it's not skip over it. So within this preparation time, this is how I made my mind map. So first of all, I said a welcome message, which basically said, or I translated of course into the language, it said, "Hi teacher, good morning, good afternoon, doesn't really matter. Today I've picked a photo or cartoon or illustration from theme, whatever the theme is. Let's say theme 1, identity." So make sure you don't only just say theme 1 of the number of the theme, also say identity, of course, in your target language. Now, if you actually look at the section 1, what it says here, part 1 presentation, let's read directly from the guide. I'm not making this up. It says the student describes the visual stimulus. So that's section 1 of part 1. And then section 2 of part 2 is and relates it to relevant themes and the target cultures. So basically what this means is that you should know that within every theme, there are sub-themes. So again, let's look at the other IB document. So within theme 1, identities, you can see that all the different, these are recommended teaching topics. Basically, these are just subtopics. So there's lifestyles, subcultures, health and well-being, beliefs and values, language and identity. So there's all these different things. Like in identities, you could be talking about your diet, you could be talking about your different cultures and cultural minorities and different festivals and how they relate to your identity and how they change over time, maybe throughout age, things like this, and multiculturalism. So it's very key and vital that you make sure that you actually know off the top of your head, off by heart, which sub-themes are within each topic. Because again, let's go back to the marking criteria, going a bit all over the place, but it all relates, I promise. Is that it says that every single thing you mention has to be linked and relevant. Look at criterion B1. How relevant are the ideas to the selected stimulus? And it says again, how well are the ideas linked to the target culture? So one of the things that whilst I was practicing during my mock exams and leading up to my final exams that I really struggled with is making sure that all my ideas were relevant. So for example, I'd see a nice photo and I'd be like, oh, it looks like they're in China. Actually, when I went to China, then I had this really cool experience and then I learned all about this crazy stuff, but it wasn't relevant at all to the photo. Instead, you want to make sure that it was relevant to the particular theme that is addressed. And don't forget, when you are given the 5 photos, if for May or for November you might get 2 or 5, we're not sure yet, it does say, or it should say at the top, which theme it's from, so you can't get them confused. But please make sure that every single thing you say must be relevant. Look at this, it says, the presentation is consistently relevant to the stimulus and draws on explicit and implicit details. So we'll work on this later. But what I'm saying is that at the introduction, after you've said good morning to the teacher and you've talked about which theme you're going to be presenting, you have to describe the photo. And so what I really use that my teacher taught me, but you can use, there's loads of different methods. It's PAIR, easy acronym to remember. So P, person or people, E is for environment, A is for atmosphere, and R is for relationship. So you're gonna say, in this photo, there are 3 people in the photo. It looks like they're all really happy, having loads of fun. What atmosphere are they in? Are they in a house? What's surrounding them? What color are the walls? What color is the sky? What's the weather like? What time of year is it? And then you've got to say A for atmosphere. Are they happy? Are they sad? And then for relationships, you can say, I think they're friends. I think they're classmates. I think they're family. Of course, you can expand this depending on the photo, but these are 4 things that I found really useful that you can cover regardless of what the photo is. So if you continue there, as I said, the second section of the part 1, after you describe the photo, you want to relate the photo to other parts of the theme. So don't forget, you have to always relate the photo to only relevant subsections. So for example, if we're gonna do this example photos that I found, of course this would be for Chinese. So you can see here, first of all, describe the photo. Okay, I think they're in a market. These are 2 people, a guy and a girl. You can talk about what color clothes they're wearing. You can talk about what vegetables you can see in the stand. But then the next step, part 2 of section 1, so after you've described it, then you talk about, you relate to the theme. It depends. If this is talking about human ingenuity, then you can talk about how a lot of people use WeChat Pay. For example, the person in the photo, she's using her phone and the QR code on the phone to pay for the vegetables. However, this was talking about identity, then you might actually want to be talking about the foods and diets in China and how they change and how there's the 8 regional cuisines. Whilst if you're talking about technology, you talk about the 5 great inventions and the 5 old inventions and then how they have changed China over time, the impact on the people of China. So there's really different ways to tackle it. So make sure that you choose the right one. So you really, I've said this already 3-4 times, but it's really vital. You know your themes and sub-themes off the top of your head. This is something I really confused, but once I mastered this, once I actually remember them, super key, super useful, and super important. Now, one last thing I want to mention is that you can only speak for 3 to 4 minutes. So what this means is that if at 4 minutes you're still going, your teacher will just interrupt you basically. So there's no way around it. You need to speak between 3 and 4. I kept it nice and safe at 3:30, 3:45, but it doesn't really matter if you're just over 3 minutes or you're just about to hit 4 minutes, because really, the maximum time is all that matters, that your whole presentation has to be between 12 and 15 minutes. So it really doesn't matter if you speak for 3 minutes and 1 second or 3 minutes and 59 seconds. That's not a big deal. It just really depends on the photo and how much you can talk and how much you can take out of that particular photo. So now if you go into the second section, which is where the teacher interacts with you, but within the section is that the teacher asks you questions and builds upon what you've already mentioned in part 1. So if we look at exactly what the guide says, is that the teacher engages the students on the theme presented in part 1, expanding on what the student has already said in the conversation. For example, if you forgot a type of vocab or a particular piece of vocab that would have been really useful within this section, you never know, your teacher might either use it in a question and frame it for you, so that would be really useful. However, if on another hand, you completely forgot to address one whole aspect of the theme, for example, if this was about theme 1 about identity and you forgot to talk about how the food and diets change within different regions of China, within different regions of your particular country, then your teacher might actually point it out and say, hey, what about the different foods around the country? Are there different cuisines? Are the markets the same all around China? So small things, so don't worry if you don't address every single thing in part 1, because that's purely impossible. You only have 3 to 4 minutes. Instead, you have 4 to 5 minutes to expand on what's been said. So your teacher's going to guide you in the direction, at least they're going to help you out. So you address the right things to make sure that if you forgot to talk about a particular subtopic, then you'll be able to do it within part 2. So really don't worry about missing out on content in part 1. And now onto part 3, which is just 5 to 6 minutes of talking about a different theme at all. It can be 1 or 2 different themes. It really depends. Normally my teachers did 2 different themes, but I've heard some teachers just do 1. But really is This is when you have to be prepared for every single theme, because for example, this photo could have been all about theme 1, and then suddenly the last 5 minutes are all about theme 3, 2, 4, or 5. It doesn't really matter. It's a different theme. So after all, even though for May 21 you are getting every single theme shown within part 1, in part 3, you have no idea what theme your teacher is going to talk about. So you have to be prepared. You have to know vocabulary. You have to know idiomatic expressions from every single theme. This is something you cannot skip. So make sure you're prepared for every theme because you have no idea what theme is going to be thrown at you in the last section. Alright, it is now time to move on to the marking criteria, and let's go straight into criterion A, which is language. So they ask, how successfully does the candidate command spoken language? And now whilst this may sound like how well do you know the language, there's a bit more to it. So they're specifically looking for the variety and how appropriate your vocabulary is. They're looking at a key thing. They're looking at the grammatical structures that you're using. Are they varied? I'll talk about this later, but keep this in mind later on. And also your pronunciation and intonation is clearly very important. So let's look at the difference, and really the only difference here between the second highest and the highest mark band is, look at this, the inclusion and use of idiomatic expressions, as well as the use of more complex grammatical structures, and they have to be used effectively. And some example of grammatical structures could be, since I was hungry, I then decided to eat, or even though I was really thirsty, I didn't bring my water bottle. Just small things. Just think about how you can use complex grammatical structures. These are key, and you'd be surprised how even though you can use simple vocab, so if I were you, I would personally spend more time, or at least now if you don't know them already, spending a lot of time learning the different types of vocabulary I use for grammatical structures rather than learning vocab for the different themes. However, of course, there is a point where you know enough grammatical structures. There's only so many that you can fit within a 15-minute talk, within a 15-minute chat with your teacher, within your oral exam, and within your paper 1. But make sure that you know enough. You need to make sure that you have a varied amount. It says here, they need to be used effectively. So you need to use them in the right sentence structure. That all needs to be clear. And the other point that I really want to point out here is the inclusion and use of idiomatic expressions. Long story short, you need to sound like you're a local. You need to sound like you're a native speaker. And then one of the things that my teacher said is that a lot of native speakers, even though they do the exam and they don't study because they speak Spanish at home or they speak the target language at home, a lot of them get 5 and 6s because they just speak how they speak normally without the inclusion of idiomatic expressions or fancy grammatical structures or some weird conjugations that are hard to use in the head because they just speak in the present and they just use simple sentences and simple vocabulary. So instead what you want to do is you just want to flex every single thing you know, okay? If you know an idiomatic expression, try to use it. So what I did to make sure that I included loads of different idiomatic expressions within my presentation and within my paper 1 as well, is that I made a list of different idiomatic expressions for every unit, for every theme, sorry. So whenever you're learning these new idiomatic expressions, I would strongly suggest they know at least 2 or 3 incredible and relatively complex idiomatic expressions for every single theme. Because what I'm saying is that there are loads of idiomatic expressions that you can use in all different types of contexts that are basically universal. You can use them in different sentences regardless. However, if you know a really fancy word, or this can either be an idiomatic expression or it can be an extension piece of vocabulary that's only used in a specific context. And then you need to make sure that you have them separate for the different themes. What I mean by this, for example, is that in Chinese, there's a certain word for putting the dumpling together, or like the process of folding the dumpling. You don't say you make dumplings. There's a special word for making dumplings when you're in a family kind of thing. So you want to make sure that you know that certain type of word so that if a photo related to food comes in or related to family, you can say, I know that in China, dumplings have a deep cultural aspect. For example, you normally make them with family and then you include the verb of making dumplings with family that is only used in that particular context, but if the market hears it, they'll be incredibly amazed and they think that you're a native speaker. Because remember, they don't know who you are, they don't know where you're from, they don't know your name, so they don't know if you're a native speaker or not. So you need to prove and make it sound like that you actually know your stuff, that you know and speak and sound like a local. So make sure you include idiomatic expressions. You know more than one for every single theme, and you also have some extension vocab for every theme to make it sound like you really, really, really know what you're doing. For example, in Spanish, there's a sobremesa, which is what you say, and what family, similar thing to Chinese to some extent, is that if I had a photo related to Unit 1, or Theme 1, talking about identity, I could talk about the importance of family within Spanish households, and that every Sunday or normally every weekend at least, the whole family gets together, and it's really not about having lunch together. It's not about the food itself. It's about chatting with your family, and it's about chatting with your friends and family and other people that are with you, eating lunch with you. And then the process of chatting over the food table is called sobremesa. It's called that particular word that is only used in that specific context. So make sure that you really know some words that are really specific and are really used in small specific contexts. Sounds a bit crazy, but trust me, you just need to know a handful. Don't bother learning 50 of them because then you won't remember them and you'll use them incorrectly. So just know 5 or 10 of them. So I do 1 per every theme, maybe 2 if you can, but definitely idiomatic expressions. And if you want to really get a good mark and get a high 7, that can carry your paper 1 and paper 2. Because now that oral is worth a lot more than what it used to. Now the listening's gone. It's worth, I forgot exactly what it was, but it's between 35 and 45%, something crazy. So make sure that if you want to get a really high 7, that you really include the use of advanced words and advanced vocabulary only in specific contexts. So let's keep going. The next criterion, B1, it's about how relevant the ideas are to the selected stimulus. So let's keep reading. How well does the candidate engage with the stimulus, which basically is, do you describe it well? Do you understand what's actually in the photo? Do you remember the words that are required to describe the photo? And then the second bit is, how well are the ideas linked to the target culture or cultures? So this is all about relevance. You need to make sure that what you're saying is relevant to the exact photo. So let's read through the top mark band here. It says the presentation is consistently relevant to the stimulus and draws on explicit and implicit details. So what this means is that it's referring to explicit details within part 1. So for example, if we look at the photo that we were using before for the Chinese one, explicit details clearly is at a night market, they're buying food, buying fruit. Implicit details, you could say, oh, it's nighttime. I know that a lot of people in China work until late. They finish work at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and a lot of them do the shopping after work. So they come back at 10 o'clock, and after work, they then go to the night market, and then they take their groceries home at midnight or so. So what this does is that just by extending what's in the photo, this is that implicit stuff that you don't really know, that you can't immediately tell from the photos. Some of these things you have to make up, but you make sure there is a strong and relevant link. That's why they put relevance 3 or 4 times within that mark band. You want to make sure that, yes, you expand on what's in the photo, but you've got to make sure it's relevant. And so within this expansion, by working upon what is in the photo, you can actually show and demonstrate your culture knowledge, that you actually understand the culture, that you know the culture, and that you know the different aspects that make up the culture, whether it's this Chinese culture, whatever your target language is. So you want to make sure that you know different aspects of culture knowledge that of course are all related to the themes and sub-themes that I talked about earlier that you can see in the IB document. And you want to make sure that, yeah, you draw upon the explicit and implicit details as it said. So again, it says exactly this. You need to provide both a description, as I said in the first part of the thing, and then the personal interpretation, which is just as I mentioned about how maybe she's working really late, she's working all day, and then at nighttime, then she does the groceries after work and brings it home. And again, you need to make a clear link to the target culture. So you can't just see a photo about this and then talk about, well, I know that in Australia there's a lot of markets, and within Australia the markets are like this and this and this, and talk about your own home country. If you're learning Spanish, you've got to talk about Spanish culture. If you're learning Chinese, you've got to talk about Chinese culture. Yes, it might be nice to sometimes include a parallel, and I actually did this in my exam, is that you talk about your whole target language for the first 3 minutes and 30 seconds, and then you just include 1 or 2 sentences saying, however, in Australia, I know that we have different family values, or we know that the food's different, or we know that the diet's different, or we know that our way of life is different. Just a small addition to show that you can do a comparison between the different cultures. But of course, that's just a small, tiny addition. That is not the body of your oral exam. It's all about making clear links to the target culture. So it's really important that you include loads of culture knowledge, as much as you can, within your oral exam. So let's continue. Then in B2, it's talking about the message and conversation. Once again, how relevant are the ideas in the conversation? Sounds like we just mentioned it already. And now it says again, to what depth are the questions answered? So now this is talking about the section where the teacher is asking you questions. So this is when you've already described the photo, you've already done your whole 3 to 4 minute spiel, and now it's where the teacher asks you questions and you answer. So key thing, I just want you to listen as I read this out. The candidate's responses are consistently relevant to the question and show some development. Notice how that's the only difference, or that's a major difference at least, between the second highest and the highest mark band, is that yes, you can answer the question, that's great, that's nice. For example, if the teacher asks you, where do you think this is? Where do you think this photo is being taken place? You can say, at a night market. Bang, you answer the question, good job. you also need to make sure that you expand on every single question that is asked. What my teacher told me as a good guideline is that you need to be able to speak for about 30 seconds per each question, more or less. So you say 3 to 4 sentences. 3 to 4 sentences is probably a good limit. You don't want to go too overboard because, of course, your teacher wants to ask you a good few questions. You can't just have 2 questions and that's it. So I'd say 30, 40 seconds is about the limit, but make sure that you expand on the ideas. For example, if she asks you, where do you think this is? You can say, this is a night market. I know that night markets are all over China. They're very convenient for people that finish work very late. And also there's normally cheap and there's a variety of foods, fresh fruit and vegetable. However, if you then went on to say, in the north, I know that a lot of people eat this type of food. In the south, I know a lot of people eat this type of food. I know in the west, it's a completely different cuisine. Now, that would be a bit too far off topic because suddenly you went from having a photo of the night market to talking about the different types of cuisine in China. Yes, that is somewhat relevant, but you want to make sure that every single thing you say is clearly linked. So you want to make sure, again here, it says that every single thing has to be relevant to every single answer, every single response has to be relevant to the question asked. So now if we continue, another aspect that you need to make sure you notice is that responses are broad in scope and depth. So as I said, you can't just say the same answer 4 or 5 times. You want to make sure you know a variety of different culture knowledge. But it also says including personal interpretations. Like I mentioned earlier, you see the night market, oh, maybe she's coming late from work, maybe she worked very late, something like that. But another thing that is new to this syllabus that still a lot of students haven't noticed, and only a few handful of teachers have noticed this, is that you need to have an attempt to engage your teacher. Basically, that's what that means. So for example, this can happen in any single part. This can happen in part 1 where you describe the photo, but it's really most suited to part 2 and 3 where it's an active conversation between you and the teacher. If the teacher asks you, what do you think the night market is? You can say, oh, this night market's here and here. This is where I think it is. I think it's in a big city because that's normally where they are, or they can be the countryside, or they're different, whatever it is. And then you can say, oh, miss or teacher, have you been to a night market? Or teacher, what is your favorite night market? Or what's your favorite fruit at a night market? Or I'd really suggest that you go to the night market if you want fresh fruit and vegetable. So you can either give your teacher a suggestion, you can ask them a brief question, or something along those lines. So you want to make sure that you engage the teacher. So that's really key if you want to go for the top band within this criterion. Make sure that you engage the teacher by doing small things like that. Including them within the conversation is really, really vital. So it's either a suggestion once again, or asking them a brief question, or anything like that. Make sure that you include this. And then finally, your interactive skills and communication in criterion C. How well can the candidate express ideas? Basically, do you know the vocabulary required to actually show and explain what's going on to answer the questions? And the second one, how well can you maintain conversation? Pretty intuitive. And another thing I really want to point out, super simple basically, but is that the candidate provides the responses in the target language. So if the teacher asks you a question and you say, and then you answer, you might not lose points, but of course the marker immediately knows that you're not a native speaker. So because is only an English thing to use, an English filler to fill in time, instead in Spanish you can say pues. Like, I get it, it sounds weird, or it will sound weird to you, but the marker, even if you use the filler words that are your filler words in that native language, immediately you'll sound like a native speaker, and you'll be speaking the target language, you won't be speaking in English. So make sure that you try to, first of all, learn filler words in your target language. Hopefully you won't need them and won't have to use them within your exam, but it's always good to know in case if you need 2-3 seconds of just filler words, just to think for a few extra seconds about what you're about to say. And clearly just make sure you don't include any English at all. Pretty intuitive, pretty obvious. And then the next section is that participation is sustained with some independent contributions. So this really relates back to engaging with your teacher, or at least that's what it sounds like to me. No one's really sure what this last section is. The IB's kept it pretty broad, but what it sounds like to me, at least, and to my teachers, that you have to really engage the teacher. You want to make sure that you have an independent contribution, or you want to make sure they include a short question, something that they can answer easily. So let's go through a few notes that I finally have on some really key aspects that you need to make sure you are using, and some things I want you to note before you do your final exam. So first of all, is that don't forget about the structure. First of all, you need a quick welcome message, super brief. And then you have to talk about what you can see in the photo, 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes of you doing that. And again, for this, I use pair. So that is people, environment, atmosphere, and relationship. And then after that, you then need to relate it to the other, or to all the different sub-themes within that theme. You have to pick which ones are relevant, but make sure you know off by heart all the different sub-themes within each themes. And of course, you need to know your ideas. You need to know what you're actually going to talk about. So one thing I really found incredibly useful when preparing for my final exam is that there are some possible questions that they ask. And of course, these are crazy. You're not going to answer these in your target language in SL. You might do so in HL. But even then, this is a bit of TOK thinking. But it says, what constitutes identity? How do languages and culture contribute to form our identity? So these are some things that, just some guiding questions to get you thinking about the right theme. So from that, you just want to get some ideas about what are some things I could mention, or just even if you just mention that dot point within your essay, within your oral exam, it could be super useful and a nice inclusion. And then you want to make sure at the end you could include a brief comparison to your own country. Make sure it's brief, 1-2 sentences max, because it's all about your target country. Then, yeah, don't worry if you don't say too much, as I said, if you don't include every single aspect in part 1. And within going back to the marking criteria, some of the key aspects, make sure you include some advanced vocabulary, some words that are only used in specific contexts, really vital you do that. Then grammatical structures, please make sure you use a variety of different advanced grammatical structures. Everyone has different ones. I had 15 or 20 or so that I was really comfortable with using. Some people had 30 or 40. Doesn't really matter as long as you are comfortable using them. You don't want to be in the exam and be not sure if you use them. You're like, oh, is this the right time to use it? Because you don't have time to think about that, especially in an oral exam. In paper 1 you do because it's all written, but when you're speaking, make sure that you definitely know your grammatical structure as well. Idiomatic expressions, I said it before, you need a few all-rounder ones that can be used in any single, in any context, but you also, if it's relevant, if you can find any, you can find some that are really relevant to theme 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. All the ideas have to be linked and relevant, pretty obvious. And finally, you need some culture analysis. So you need to make sure you know the culture like the back of your hand, as if you were a native speaker and a local. So guys, other than that, I just want to point out, I forgot to mention earlier, one last thing that I really found incredibly useful when practicing for both my oral exams, so this really helped me out. So I didn't have to use any filler words or didn't have to just stop and pause halfway through my exam. So really, I kid you not what I did. I used to stand up in my room. I don't know, I couldn't do it sitting down. It wouldn't help me out. I would stand up in my room, walk around my room, and I would generally just look at the different pieces of vocab, look at different vocabs that were related to different themes. For example, if I looked at identity, I might have included the vocabulary saying diet. So then I kid you not, I ranted on about diet in China or in Spain or whatever target language yours is for 60 to 90 seconds or as long as you can. I kid you not, you make these links in your head. So if you talk about diet, you'll be surprised where your mind goes, because this is a exact perfect practice for what you're going to be doing in the section 2 and section 3 of your oral exam. You're really just going to be given a question and you're thrown in the deep end, and then you have to find a way to answer the question. You honestly, or at least for me, I'd start off an answer and I have no idea where I was going, but I'd be able to catch myself and actually bring it together. So really make sure, at least what I did that helped out really well, just stand up, walk around your room or walk around wherever you're studying and just speak at the wall. Make sure you're speaking, don't just do it in your head. Speaking does the job. After all, you're practicing speaking, your intonation and your pronunciation. So really what I found useful, just get a piece of paper with all this different vocab, and you can either say, okay, this is an advanced piece of vocab I want to use, and try to use it in a sentence, and then once you've done that, then go on and build upon what you've just said. For example, if you said, oh, I know that in China there's all these different minority races, then you can talk about, okay, for example, I know one, this is one of the culture, this is one of the festivals. Oh, talking about festivals, in China there's loads of festivals. And you talk about the Spring Festival, and then you're saying, oh, one of the things within the Spring Festival is the coming together as family. Actually, in China, they really value family. They value it so much that actually the grandparents normally look after the children of the parents, and the parents go out working, and all these different things that you can talk about, and then just keep talking, because there's no better way to practice than just speaking. And of course, at the beginning, I was terrible. I kid you not, I'd get a sentence, I'd barely get a sentence, and then my brain would just stop. But what you want to do is don't stop, or at least if you're stopping, think about it and then keep going. Whatever you do, make sure you get at least 4 or 5 sentences out of every single thing you say. So for example, some of the things that I would find really useful is look at these subtopics and just see lifestyles. Talk about lifestyles for 5 to 6 sentences. Just speak and speak and speak. Then talk about language and identity for 5 to 6 sentences. Just go on a rant and speak. I kid you not, I couldn't do this for hours on end because my brain would be fried after doing this for 20 minutes. But I'd do this a lot of times a week right before my exams to make sure that 1, I wouldn't stop speaking. I wouldn't use and ah and just use filler words within my exam, and secondly, to make sure that this really links all the ideas in your head, and it is by far the best practice method. Of course, the best way to practice is by actually doing it, or by at least doing this, which is just speaking and speaking and speaking. So that is my final tip, guys. Really good luck in your oral exam. I'm sure you guys will nail it. After all, you now have all the tips, you've learned the marking criteria, you know exactly what to do to get the top band. So there is no excuse for you guys to not do well in this exam. So really good luck, guys, and thank you for listening.